This Jesus in Gospels Matthew today does two kind of surprising things. The first is he makes the decision of who he is going to place his faith in for when he's gone, for continuing on and building his church. Now, there's some scholarly debate on whether this was actually authentic Jesus, because most likely he wouldn't have used the concept of church. But setting that aside, Jesus has made his decision, and he calls Peter. Who is surprised about that? Peter is not necessarily known for being the disciple who always gets it right. We see time and time again that Peter actually gets it wrong. And so I think, I imagine the rest of the disciples kind of being in this space with Jesus saying, really? That guy? He's the one who's the rock on which you're going to build the future of this whole thing? But what does that mean for us? That God has chosen Peter to be the future of all that is to come. It means, first, that if we're going to use that word church, the church is fallible. If the church is built upon Peter, then we can pretty much safely assume that the future of the church as an institution is pretty fallible, because Peter does not always get it right. And actually, next week, we're going to see just how wrong Peter sometimes gets it. And that is where our church begins, with this human being who is a true human being. And so we don't put our faith and our hope and our trust in the church as an institution, or in any one person as a human being, but instead in God. That is the promise that we are receiving here with these words. Not that Peter has been given the keys to the kingdom and is now suddenly put on par with Jesus himself and is this perfected figure who we should all emulate, but instead a gift, a reminder that the church will not be perfect, we will not be perfect, and yet God can still be there. God's word and truth and light and grace can shine through, even in fallible people and institutions. It's a pretty great deal that we're getting with Peter being the rock here. The other surprising thing that Jesus does is sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he's the Messiah. Who thinks that makes total sense? Okay, good. Yeah, it makes some sense to me too now. Didn't at first. Why would Jesus, who spends so much time saying, I've commissioned you to go out and preach the good news, preach and teach and heal and proclaim, why would he say, don't tell anybody that I'm the Messiah? There's some big implications for what that means for us today, too. What it means for us as a church, what it means to use the E word and evangelize. It means that we don't always have to speak those words. That instead we should, as our final verse of the hymn said, live and speak his praise. It is not simply by word that we are supposed to say, Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is where I put my faith. But instead, by following in the life that we are called to live. Otherwise, things can get confusing. If we are speaking things but not living them, we're sending mixed messages. I remember in celebrating our back to school day, I remember being in high school and gel pens were all the rage. I see some of you nodding and smiling. It was so exciting to go and get your school supplies and get the right gel pens. And so we were working on a group project, and I did not remember to bring my gel pens, but my friend did, and she had them so nicely, neatly organized in her lockbox, to keep them all together. And we were sitting like at opposite sides of the table, and I said, "Hey, can I borrow one of your gel pens?" And she says, "Okay." Keeps going, doing her stuff. So I said, "Okay, could you pass them to me?" She's like, "Sure." Put them about 2 inches away from herself. So then I'm like, all right, I guess I got to get up to get this. And so, words and deeds sometimes make a difference. I was a distraught 7th grader trying to figure out if by taking those gel pens, I was going to be making an enemy for life, or if it was worth borrowing them so that my part of the project could look nice and shiny like everybody else's. How we act and what we say has got to match. And so often, it is the actions, we know this, actions speak louder than words, right? Some of these rote sort of words we throw out, but many times have real weight and meaning. Actions speak louder than words. And Jesus reminds us of that when he says, "Don't go and tell anybody that I'm the Messiah. Instead, live it." People are going to know who you are. People are going to recognize you, and they're going to ask you about how you're living your life. You remember in the garden when Peter goes, Jesus has been condemned, he's been brought before Pilate, and Peter goes and he's hanging out and warming himself by the fire, and they recognize him. Not because he walked up and he said, "Hey guys, I'm a friend of Jesus and you've all got it wrong and you've got to let him go." They recognized him because of who he was, because of how he sounded, because they knew that they had seen him before walking around with Jesus. People recognize us not necessarily because we're going out and yelling loudly at the top of our lungs on street corners about what we believe, but because of how we live our lives. Because of where they see us going on Sunday mornings, maybe, or because of what we put on Facebook or on various forms of social media, or what we promote in our places of work, where we put our energy and our time. That's what people see about us. And if where and what we're putting out is sending the same message that our words are speaking, then we're doing it right. If we're not sending those same messages, then we have to ask ourselves, what is what I'm doing saying? What is this decision I'm making? What message is it sending to the people who are seeing it? If I've got an All Saints bumper sticker on and I cut people off in traffic on the same route every single day, then probably people aren't going to want to come to All Saints. But if I'm constantly letting them in, then maybe they'll say, "Hey, that person's really nice, and look at that church she goes to. Maybe I'll check that out." There's all sorts of little ways that we can live and speak God's praise. And that is our call. That is what we are asked to do each and every day. And then also remember that this church is built on Peter. And if we have grace and love for Peter, then we can have grace and love for ourselves and for our church when we get it wrong. So go forth, live, and speak God's praise.